So, do a quick attendance. Mr. Peterson, if you start us, please.
Pete Peterson.
Patrick Flynn.
Elsie Gray Johnson.
Dave Trey. Tim Steen.
Jennifer Johnson.
Bill Evans.
Bernie Hall.
Julia Tucker, Assembly Council.
Mr. Foos, will you introduce yourself, please?
Paul Foos with the Fairview Business Association. I've got with me Chris Constant, who is the chairman of the Fairview Community Council. And I think that Chris Schutte has also been working with him on with the Downtown Partnership.
Jerry Weaver, Community Development.
Dan Sullivan, Mayor.
Lucinda Mahoney, CFO.
Thanks everybody for getting together today. We've got quite a bit to cover, so Lucinda, you want to get us started, and we'll.
Actually, the mayor will kick it off.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks everyone for coming. And obviously, this is of keen interest, or we wouldn't have a full room of both Assembly members and members from the public. So I want to thank the Fairview Business Group and the Community Council and everybody that has worked to get us to this point, because it is something that I think there is common ground on. But this is an area of our city that is long overdue for some tender loving care and some innovative thinking on how, not only for this area, but other areas in town, we might be able to use some innovative strategies on truly creating incentives for both development and redevelopment. One of the things that, having first been presented with the concept, that you find out is that there's oftentimes much more to things than you first realize. It's not a simple thing to do what sounds simple sometimes. And so what's really important is that we really have all voices involved in this, because it is that important. And as you look at the list of folks who will potentially be in discussion on this, whether it's the Department of Transportation, certainly the Planning Department, the community, you've got entities like Kavada. I mean, they all potentially play a role in this, and so it's really, really important from a planning standpoint that we do it right. But I don't want anybody to think that that doesn't mean that we're not enthused about making sure that we do it. It just really ends up being something where there's variables, not only in the terms of financing options available to us, new financing tools that we may want to seek, and making sure that all the stakeholders certainly have a voice at the table. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Mahoney, and again, thanks everyone for coming. What a great turnout for this.
Okay, with that, what we did was we set out an agenda to allocate time to each party that is impacted by the proposal that is on in front of you right now. Paul is going to start with presenting, the needs for Fairview, and then from there, each different branch of government within the state, DOT environmental, DOT planning, will provide some overview comments, because the proposal does impact some future planning there. And then also Kavada is impacted in regard to how it plans to digress into this zone. Then lastly, what we'll do is there are fiscal impacts to this. If we do abate and not include property, it does impact the tax cap. And so I want to go through that so that you can fully understand the impact to the tax cap and to revenues in terms of how they are shifted. So with that, we'll turn it over to Paul, and he can go through his proposal.
No, that's not it. That's not it? No, it's February 6th. That's not it.
You want to write above?
Right there. That's it.
While he's doing that, what I'll do is just kind of talk to you about what the
Go ahead.
maps are. Okay, so in regard to designating an area as deteriorated, one of the jobs of the CFO is to look at it and ensure that it meets the criteria that's established in the code. So what you see in all of these maps and the maps that you have in front of you is the designated area, and then certain criteria associated with that designation. So what we did was we looked at, how does this area meet that criteria? And some of it is vacant lot, some of it is environmental properties, some of it is land to building value, because that is an indication of blight. And so we felt like from a quantitative perspective and analysis, we needed to do all this to ensure that we went through the proper process to justify the deteriorated area. So that's what all of these maps represent, is a different criteria defined in the code. And then the blue line area is what we will talk about towards the end, which is what we are presenting as an alternative solution. So I think you're ready now, Paul?
I don't think they're quite ready, so if you want to go through these maps, that would be, if you want to go ahead with yours, I think you should go ahead and do it, because that won't hurt what I'm going to say.
Well, why don't we go ahead and start with Craig Lyon.
Okay.
And as you can see from the designated area, there are some impacts to some of our wider transportation plans. And so Craig is going to go through that.
So we at AMAPS, we're the Transportation Planning Group, and we work on the federal funds that come into the city. And so in our long-term plan, we have the highway-to-highway project included in our plan, and it's broken out now into 3 phases. And the first phase is in the shorter term, and the other 2 phases are in the longer term, which is basically 2024 plus. Could happen anywhere in there. So what you have in your slides here talk about the Seward Highway improvements. So the state has done some of that right now, and they are working on the rest of it. They're right now working on the Diamond to Dowling, which should be ready to go to construction in 2017. And then the Seward Highway 36th Avenue improvements, those are probably in the 2018 plus timeframe. They're starting that, but they don't have a construction phase ready to go yet. So those are the 2 phases that we talk about here. And then the highway-to-highway, again, is broken into 3 separate phases in the long-range plan. The first phase is the 33rd to Chester Creek, or about 20th. And that one is the one that's in the shorter term, kind of the 2018 timeframe. That's how we have it programmed right now in our transportation improvement program. Phase 2 would be kind of the Chester Creek to Airport Heights. And then phase 3 would be Airport Heights to the Ingrid Gamble, so kind of finishing everything off. And that was broken out into 3 separate phases the last time we did the update to that. We did have this, the Gamble Street redevelopment idea of the 3-lane, or the 4-lane down to 3-lane. We had a presentation at our, both our technical and policy committee by Paul just recently. The technical committee asked for modeling to be done on that. And the modeling that was done wasn't quite what we asked for, but it's probably because we didn't ask for it exactly correctly. But basically, the modeling that was done was a no-build without the Kinnikarn project. And so we've asked them to come back and rerun the modeling showing all of the projects that were in the short term shown as built, including the Kinnikarn Crossing project. So we could get a better idea of what it will look like to neck that down to 3 lanes when we have all of the projects in the short term built out. So we are waiting on the results of that modeling, and then we'll have a presentation back before AMATS. That project is, or that roadway, as you know, is part of the National Highway System, so it's not something AMATS would typically spend their allocation on because it would require a lot of money, but part of what the requirement is to show that necking down from 4 lanes to 3 lanes is consistent with our long-range plan, and so that's why we're asking them to do the modeling to make sure that we can say with some certainty that when you do that, it doesn't really cause all of our intersections to go to level F and fail and not be able to handle the capacity of all those cars. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Any questions? Just a couple of things for the body. Since I'm one of your AMATS representatives. First off, you may remember we had a small appropriation last year to do the modeling that Mr. Lyon is referring to, and that continues. Secondly, when we redid the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, the MTP, initially Chester Creek to Airport Heights was one long-term plan, and before we finished it, it was broken into the 3 parts that Mr. Lyon described: the Airport Heights interchange, Airport Heights to the Gamble-Ingra area, and Gamble-Ingra to Chester Creek, or 5th, 6th Chester Creek. So when Lucinda gets to her alternative plan, it's sort of this might be what we think would happen. The only thing in the short-term plan right now is the environmental money, the reconnaissance study, and only because I threw a couple tantrums. So with that, are there any further questions about that piece of it before we let Mr. Lyon go?
Wait, excuse me.
Yeah.
When do you expect this modeling to be done?
The data was transmitted yesterday. The data that you requested was sent to Jennifer yesterday.
And so, and the data that you're using, you're collecting it from where?
What they did is they did 24/7 for 2 weeks, and what they do is they track 6 numbers, your cell phone number. You could track them all and tell where everyone came from, but they take those 6 numbers and track that in real time. So it's the most updated information that they have, and they compare that against the models, the DOT models, and the municipal transportation plan model. So that was modeled this last year. That's how recent it was.
And this might be naive, but as you sit on AMAX and you're looking at what's going on the south part of the Seward Highway, from 36 on, where we've been expanding lanes, and are we doing data on, what's happening there and how it relates, because, what goes in comes out, maybe, or, it's...
Craig, would you get her a copy of the mobility study? Because what it shows, Jennifer, is we actually have declining wait times on our major arterials because of the work that we've been doing over the past decade.
Right, so the
And
declining...
It all meshes
Well,
together.
it all meshes together.
It includes the Dowling improvements, it includes the C Street improvements, it includes the third lane on the Glen coming in, through, or the fourth, and through
Right.
Merrill Field area. All that stuff is contributing. So it all
And
points
then
together.
I would be able to see how that would relate to
Should give you-
Gamble,
Should give you a good idea, yeah.
if that was a juggernaut.
Yeah. And Paul's talked about it a little bit too, I think, but that's the bigger picture.
Yeah.
So, anything else for Craig before we let him go? All right, you're off seat for a few minutes, Mr. Bryan. Paul, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Assembly, and thanks for your attention to this matter. This is a culmination of about a year of work. We first met with the mayor and discussed our plans for revitalization. And we discussed some tax incentives, and he asked some people to look at it. So we met with the Community Development Authority and the municipal attorneys and some other people. And in the past, the municipality hadn't been able to do tax increment financing because of the way your tax structure is set up with service areas. The law department had identified constitutional issues. So when I was in Dutch Harbor as a mayor out there, what we did is when people put in infrastructure, they paid for it, but then we gave them a tax credit back against that. But they had to pay their original tax assessment. So we weren't giving up revenue, we were investing with them. And then once that infrastructure was paid off, we went back to full assessment. So that's what we put on the table. That's what we've been working on ever since. And let me see if I can figure out. So, the revitalization goals, we encourage rebuilding of the commercial zone, affordable housing. We've heard a lot of talk about this, but we're actually wanting to do something about it. And we're ready to do it. We were going to encourage higher density housing in this strip between the Gamble and English Strip. And this is very consistent with your 2020 plan. They call it an urban transition zone. Affordable housing, housing that's close enough that people don't have to drive to work. Now, we want to kind of change the character of the area. Anybody that's been by 13th and Gamble know it's like a free-for-all party zone for everybody who just wants to drink on the streets. There's really aged municipal infrastructure in the area. When any developer comes in to do something, they have to upgrade all that infrastructure at their cost. Not their building cost, the municipal infrastructure. And in many cases, this is so high that people just walk away from the project. They don't do it. I'm going to clean up legacy pollution, and you'll hear about that later, and also eventually increase the tax base of the municipality. So as we have laid this out, the program elements, abate the cost of municipal infrastructure for commercial developments, and abate the cost of construction for housing to give it an additional incentive to be built. The tax credit would only apply to the increment above existing tax assessments, so you don't lose any revenue. And this would pre-qualify projects in this area. And under state law, you can designate an area as deteriorated. And that's basically what we're doing here, so that you don't have to go through that test. And if you're investing in this area, you're pre-qualified for that. Additionally, according to state law and the code, if you're a housing development, you have to have at least 8 units. This is not going to qualify to an individual home or a 4-plex or a 6-plex. The exemption lasts until the abatement credit is fulfilled, or 10 years. And again, that's state law and your municipal code. And we also suggested that this ordinance would sunset after 10 years. Part of the reason for that is to create an incentive for people to do things earlier, but also to give you a chance to review the program and make sure it's working the way that you want it. So why it's important, aging municipal infrastructure is expensive, and like I said, when people want to do a development, in many cases it kills the project. The current ordinance is unwieldy and unused. If what we had was working now, you'd see more of it. Almost nobody does it. That's why you don't see any applications for deteriorated properties. We've had 1 or 2. They've been highly controversial, and it's like, because the people want to do them, they're like, oh, we're just giving our money to the rich people, and then they come back and say, well, the assembly there just in with them, and look at, they gave them $50 to their campaign, and there's a newspaper article. Nobody wants to go through that. So it just really is not working, what you've got on the books right now. Combining commercial and housing in the abatement zone, and we really want to do that where commercial storefront housing behind or on top. I think it makes a lot of sense for the use of the space. Implements a 2020 plan for urban transition. Assists a blighted downtown community, and part of this is because of decisions that have been made. Decisions to concentrate social services, decisions that have been made to put major freeways through a residential and business district. All these things happened in the past. We're asking for the tools that we can use to try to do something about that. So this is part of an overall revitalization plan. I gave you a copy of our overall plan. I think it's pretty well thought out. It has a Gamble Street redevelopment. And again, we're going through the AMATS process on this and are providing them with the data. And, to this time, we still, it keeps changing what we get asked to do, but still we come back and respond over and over again with new data. But even though you passed a resolution in support of this, and when we took it to planning and zoning, they made the finding that this street is inherently unsafe for passengers and for cars. And yet, we don't have the support of the municipal team for this project within AMATS. So that's something that we're asking for. Interface with highway to highway in Cabada, we don't know what they are. We've asked over and over again. And we're involved in the highway to highway discussions, and then they were shut down because they were controversial. We talked to Cabada and said, well, we want to talk about how you're going to interface with us. And they said, well, our EIS ends at 3rd Avenue. So who's responsible for this? We've been proposing all along. We'll work with people and help figure out a solution to this. So, we've been talking to DOT about that. We know there's solutions out there. Our chronic inebriate initiative, we were successful last year in getting $4 million over 2 years from the legislature to address the chronic inebriate program, and we will be coming back to you with additional requests and to the mayor for the cooperation of the prosecutor, the police, the municipal courts, and to you for some possible restrictions on liquor sales. And then we're looking at a possible parking in a commercial building at 15th and Gamble to try to relieve the congestion when you have an event at the Sullivan Arena. So part of this, and here's your chair of the planning and zoning, made the official finding, it's unsafe for pedestrians and traffic. This is the street there. We've got the unusual situation of DOT this next year spending money to come in and put ADA cuts on all the intersections and to repave this road for a sidewalk that a wheelchair can't even get past. In the winter, they're going out here into the road to try to get around it. So this Gamble Street project's really important, and I know we'll talk maybe a little bit more about that later. I don't want to dwell on this, but this is something that absolutely has to be addressed. So when we look at this, when I say it's expensive for people to do it, here's a couple of cases. So this is the Horn Doctor, a little music store. Its bill for municipal infrastructure was $330,000. And if I told you the whole story of what they had to go through this, you'd be horrified. The only reason they were able to do it is the family received a large inheritance from their parents. It was always their dream to do this, and this is why they did it. This is the 9th and Gamble Gym. A good friend of mine from Dutch Harbor put that together. Over $500,000. He said if he'd have known that, he'd never do it again. So this is what people are up against, and this is for the municipal infrastructure, not their development costs. So what we see here, and I'm just going to show you some of the pictures of abandoned properties. Those last two are the only two new developments we've had in the past few years. This has been abandoned for a couple of years. Nobody wants to rent it. This is the one at 13th and Gamble. This has been abandoned for more than 5 years. A beautiful property, really nice. Nobody will touch it with a 10-foot pole. You talk to Jack White, they bring somebody over there, they wouldn't even think of going in there. Dilapidated, rundown, dilapidated. What did I get here? Anyway, maybe I don't need that. What do I need to do here?
Oh, just exit away. Just
Huh?
exit. Can you just click on these?
Yes.
And it'll go away.
I thought I was doing Anybody know how to run this computer? I'm on Macintosh, I'm sorry. Okay, there we go. All right. So here's some more dilapidated, rundown, condemned properties. Rundown, abandoned, polluted. This is Alexander Body Shop. You know, if you just drive through the area, you see a lot of this. So, you know, when we took this idea for this ordinance, we have the support of the Fairview Business Association, the Community Council, the Downtown Partnership, the Anchorage Community Development Authority. We've worked a lot with them. And the Planning and Zoning Commission recently endorsed this in the Fairview Community Plan as they look through it. So here's the article. You've got the full article in front of you, and although you might think it's complicated, they looked at it as very simply as we did, and in the ordinance that was drafted by Chairman Flynn, and which is before you to do this, and people invested. And again, they did it just the increment over the assessment of the property. It worked really well for them. They made $6 million. I know this really worked in Dutch Harbor. We did a lot of our development this way, and when I left there as mayor, I left them with $30 million in the bank. I don't know how much they have now. But anyway, this really worked as an economic development tool, and it's a short-term investment for money you wouldn't have anyway. And you know, we had a lot of discussions with the financial team, and I know people say there's fiscal impacts, and they say, well, geez, look how much tax revenue that we might give up. Well, look how much investment there is. And once this infrastructure, which isn't theirs anyway, this is your infrastructure. This is your water line, your drainage system, your road, your everything. This is yours. It's not theirs. They're having to pay for it as part of the development. Once that's paid off, then the assessment goes to full payment, and it's an increase. So our position on the ordinance that you have before you, we support it. We understand that there were some issues on the commercial side to have the but-for, to say that people had to open their books and do all these things and prove that for some other reason it wouldn't happen unless you have this. That's the reason people don't want to use the existing ordinance. But we would support it as it's written. And the other thing, we support the area identified in the draft, but you guys as a policy will decide which areas that you want to support in this, and you know, even if we got this reduced area, it would mean a lot to us, but we think the rest of it is justified. And the one area that we look at here is the Hyder to Ingra, and that's potentially the highway to highway. But I think what we're saying to those people is we're doing an inverse condemnation of your property. We're taking away your property value by saying someday maybe there's a road there, so we don't want you to build anything on it. But in the meantime, we're not going to compensate you, we're not going to come in and take your property, we're just going to take the value of your property and eliminate incentives for people to build on it. So we've discussed this with DOT, and we think that if they're going to do that, they ought to go in and they ought to buy some of those properties and take and give people a chance to get the value of their property rather than take it from them. And we've talked to some people that do property management. If they do that, they'll manage these facilities for DOT. They're some of the worst areas they have, the crack houses, the prostitution, the really crappy old sixplexes. But if we were to do that, that's part of the reason we want to redevelop that area. But if people determine that because somebody might build something there by 2035, which is a schedule now, and you want to take that, somebody needs to do something to compensate those property owners. And we agree with the administration on what they've said about environmental cleanup. If you're a responsible party and they have a legal responsibility to do that, that should be their responsibility. They shouldn't be able to abate that with taxes. But we do have a lot of orphan sites there, sites that were old and, you know, from a long time ago. Nobody knows who's responsible, or the people who own them don't have the ability to clean them up. And the other thing is we don't want people to double dip. If they get state or federal funds to clean it up, they shouldn't also be able to apply for a tax abatement. So following this, if you adopt this ordinance or some version of it, we'll go and market this to developers. You'll see the community plan coming before you. It's been through planning and zoning. They unanimously endorsed it. We'll be coming to you as zoning overlays for combined commercial and housing developments under Title 21, which is allowed. In this area, the whole community has said, we'll agree to commercial and high-density housing there. They want to maintain the residential aspect of the rest of it, but we want to do this high density there. We really think that'll help for affordable workforce funding or housing. Funding for Gamble Street redevelopment, we've done all the cost estimating for that with the funds that you gave us, and we also met with the folks from Hobbs, part of their idea of putting in the new power plant that they're proposing, and they've got a lot of waste heat from that, and there's already some utilidors in place, is that we would run a district heating program and we redevelop Gamble Street to bring that hot water in and heat that whole area there. We heated sidewalks, we can save a lot of money for people, it'd be an additional incentive. AHFC, 2 years ago, we got passed House Bill 40 through AHFC where they can finance combined commercial and housing. And before they only used to be able to do housing, so they've implemented that with regulations, and we're working with Cook Inlet Housing on that. And then we want to cooperate with you on the issue of chronic inebriates. And the last thing I want to say is really thank you. The Assembly has been so supportive of everything that we've been trying to do here. We've tried to do our best to respond to everything that's been asked of us and to do it in a professional way, answer the questions of the city municipal transportation planning, and work with Lucinda for a long time on this, DOT to try to answer their concerns. And you know, like I said, we're just looking for some tools to help us build. We think this builds all of Anchorage, and we hear a lot of talk about housing. We actually want to do something about it. I would leave it at that and take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz. Anybody have any questions for Paul before we move on? And we may need to come back to you as things come up, if that's okay.
Yeah, we'll sit around.
Okay, let's keep on rolling. Jerry, you're up.
Okay, I have some general information for you. I wanted to thank Public Works for making these GIS.
I'm impressed.
It has a very
It's a lot of data.
significant amount of information across the board. We have the land use plan map, which is our municipal plan. We have
That's good.
the percent of residents below poverty level, the environmental considerations, the building age and condition area, the ratio of building value to land value, and existing land uses. But, so there's the handouts there as well for you. 2020 was adopted in 2001. The Fairview Community Council has been working on their neighborhood plan before then, and they just came to before the Planning Commission this week. The Planning Commission approved it. Part of their consideration in approving it they were concerned about some of the issues that Mr. Hughes spoke about. And I think one of the recommendations that came from in addition to what was before this was to accelerate perhaps the environmental portion of highway that might be helpful to move things along in this area. But the Fairview community has been working on their plan for over a decade. And it's well done. It was grassroots oriented and helped Beck and Associates helped finish it up this week. And so I think a pretty good document that mirrors the goals and objectives out of 2020. This particular section of the Gamble Street, the Gamble Street reconstruction has been identified in the EMATS process for quite a long time. And basically what it said was that when highway to highway was constructed, that Gamble Street would become a local serving commercial street. We support that. A bit of a problem with that is that we don't exactly know the alignment of the H2H or the Cavada connection coming into here. So we would have concern with respect to the amount of area that is being proposed in this district. There's about $2 billion worth of property, existing property values in those areas, which is considerable. So the infrastructure improvements to Gamble, I think they're what, 18 to 20
18 million.
6 million for the electrical undergrounding. Perhaps you could look at kind of an incremental approach to helping this particular section of the community with respect to maybe perhaps accelerating the undergrounding of the electrical overhead. And so it could be done in sequence or phases. There's much more to be discussed, but that's kind of my general.
Mr. Weaver, this time it's getting back before us, I think, on the agenda. So, okay. And we're going to talk a little bit about the routing highway to highway when Ms. Whitney gets up here. She knew that was coming, right? Okay. Listen to it again next up.
Okay, Robert Wyman.
Sure.
We invited Robert in, as you know, because there is a component of this that would provide tax abatement for any costs associated with environmental remediation and cleanup. So he is going to talk about other types of funding available as well as the pier. It's just a handout.
It's not on the slide?
No.
Okay, that works.
Do you think so?
Yeah, well, it's just included in
Right.
the slides are included. Okay.
Page 5.
Yes, page 5. Would you turn that off?
Turn on the bubble machine.
Okay,
Go ahead, please. There we go.
My name is Robert Weimer. I'm with the State of Alaska DEC in the Contaminated Sites Program and oversees many of the sites that are within this proposed abatement zone. If you've got the handout, it's got 3 slides that put together. The first slide talks about that state and federal funds are available to assist in the assessment and cleanup of properties. It's called the Brownfield Assistance Program. And it doesn't cover every site. There's certain requirements of the federal program. So, but one of the Cook Inlet Housing is actually working with the Brownfield program on one of the proposed projects within this abatement zone, and I know they've done work with them on several others around town. And if there's any questions regarding this program, I've got the contact person, John Carnahan, with their program. He's in our Fairbanks office.
All right, Ms. Johnson, question for you.
What is how difficult is it to get funding from this? I mean, is it a restricted, how difficult it is to get funding, and what's the federal budget? I mean, are people competing after,
Yeah, there's competition nationwide. What they do is they acquire a certain amount of money for the state of Alaska, and so they're evaluated on a case-by-case project, but there have been several within acreage that have gotten funding already.
And what's the state of Alaska's budget on this?
The state doesn't have a
Or
budget.
For the federal, what's the budget for the state?
What's the state piece of the federal
Yeah.
budget?
Yes, through us.
Yeah, I don't know the exact amount. That's John Carnahan would know. It varies from year to year how much money they're able to acquire for the program and how much they have for grants.
Any rough number though, what's been?
It's a couple $1 million a year.
That's the number I have as well.
Oh, so it's not a large fund,
Right.
it's something for small properties.
Yeah, and it mainly helps with the initial assessment to either identify whether there is contamination or to assess the extent if there is contamination.
So we're doing phase 1, phase 2 of these, that's it, basically.
I believe there's some grants that can deal with more of the cleanup process and other things too, but they've kind of got different kinds of grants, different evaluations. On the second slide is general items. The first one is that any contaminated property can be developed. It doesn't need to wait until it's cleaned up. So we have a lot of sites out there that are active. There's businesses there, and a lot of sites have been redeveloped. Just if it is still contaminated, then DEC is involved in part of that process to make sure that if they do encounter some contaminated soil, that it's properly dealt with.
You IC, you institute controls on this?
If it's an open active site, there's generally not ICs, but we're involved with any movement of soil or water on the property. And if it's a closed site that had contamination remaining, it has institutional control. We're part of that process. The second one is development or utility work on a property could find unknown contamination and may lead to identification of a new contaminated site. So currently there's been 44 contaminated sites identified in the proposed abatement zone, of which six are currently active and the rest are closed out. But anytime you're doing work on a property, you could certainly run into an unknown contamination, and we would be notified and we'd work with them on that. Third bullet, sites closed with cleanup complete with institutional controls generally have limited amounts of contaminated soil or groundwater remaining. So we have two kinds of closures. One is called cleanup complete with institutional controls, and the other is called cleanup complete. The cleanup complete basically means that pretty much everything meets their default levels and safe. The water meets drinking water standards, things like that. The cleanup complete with institutional control means there's not enough left that we need to do active treatment on the site. But there may be some pockets of contamination that if they're doing work on the site or utilities, they may encounter it and needs to be properly taken care of. Or there might be some low levels of groundwater contamination. Might be there's a restriction for not drawing water from that aquifer or putting a water line or something there. Next bullet. In many cases, past or current insurance will cover the release investigation cleanup costs. A lot of the real older insurance policies did not have a pollution liability provision, so there's some old policies out there that cover the cleanup. And especially with like the new regulated underground storage tank systems, there's a federal and state requirement that they have $1 million cleanup and assessment insurance policy. So if there's from a regulated tank like a gas station site, if they have a new release or something like that, then that's covered with insurance. Be borne by the property owner.
Mr. Hall's question for you.
Actually,
Find what he's reading off.
Yeah, your slide.
Yeah, it's not
Excuse me,
different.
we didn't get that slide.
That's okay.
It's an error
We
in
can
the
go find
packet,
it.
so sorry.
If you need chapter and verse on this early, I know it. This is how I make my money, so.
Yeah, got it.
And, okay, well, we can get that to you.
Thank you.
The other item is depending on the amount and type of contamination, cleanups can take several years at a significant cost for the responsible party. So some sites are very small spills and very, a few $1,000s to clean up. Others can be much more expensive depending on the extent.
Mr. Train has a question for you, sir.
The slide, this one,
We're not
Yeah.
there yet.
okay, shows 6 active
sites.
Yes.
Are those still currently being polluted, or what do they mean by active?
Well, active means that means they're not closed out. So that means there's still contamination above our default cleanup level. So there's groundwater contamination above drinking water standards and some residual soil contamination above our cleanup level. So those are sites that are open and are being actively monitored and cleaned up.
Not currently being polluted. I mean, they're not dumping new stuff into there?
No. This is all for existing contamination from past.
They identify 4 sites responsible to Chevron and Shell.
Yes.
So who were responsible for the other 2 sites?
The other 2 sites, one is called the Alaska Real Estate Parking Lot, and the other, which is at 717 East 4th Avenue, and the other is Snow White Cleaners at 300 East 5th Avenue.
Are we trying to get federal Superfund cleanup for the dry cleaners? Because I know we had to do that off of Tudor Road in Lake Otis, where the cleaners had just polluted the ground. We had to do a Superfund cleanup for that.
Right. That was actually that's on project manager for that site, the Peacock Cleaners site. Yeah. And that one got a couple different brownfield grant to do assessments and do some cleanup.
So we're going to try and do something with this?
Well, the Alaska Real Estate Parking Lot already is in that process. They already have state and federal money has gone towards that site to assess and monitor that property.
How about the dry cleaners?
The Snow White Cleaners, I'm not intimately familiar with that one. I know it doesn't have state or federal funding. It's more in the earlier part of the process.
Thank you.
I was just sharing with LV, ironically, the Snow White site is directly adjacent to DEC's local headquarters.
Yes.
So,
We have to keep a close eye on it.
bad place to pollute. Keep going.
So the third slide is the environmental map that shows the location of 44 total sites. One of the triangles has a little, you've got the older map too, looks like, or the 2 times. There's one of the yellow ones actually is two sites, so that's why it only adds up to 43. So there's 6 active sites, 10, which are the red triangles. There's 10 yellow ones, which are the closed, cleanup complete with institutional controls, and there are 28 sites, which are green, which are the closed, cleanup complete. So those have little or no contamination remaining from sites.
Any questions for Mr. Weimer?
If you don't mind, on one slide here, it says one site's not economically feasible to remediate. And what we understand there, and I don't think this has been put out there before, but I got it from John Carnahan when I asked him about him, is this top red site at the top. And it was a dry cleaner, and then it was a transmission shop or something. That has spread all the way down to the Alaska Railroad property and is headed to Ship Creek and is not stopped. And it's exactly the landfall for the Kabata connection.
Yeah, and that's the Alaska Real Estate Parking Lot,
Correct.
which is site name is for that. And that's the one that's getting their state and federal money that's actively working on assessing that site.
Really more sure about Ship Creek later. Okay, anything else for Mr. Weimer? Thank you, sir. Appreciate your
And I'll put them out in the back, but I did bring out some handouts regarding questions about the brownfield program and our cleanup process of the sites. So if anyone's interested, I'll have it in the back.
Jennifer, you're up. You and I spent a lot of time together.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Witt. I'm here representing Rob Campbell, Regional Director for the Department of Transportation. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here today. In addition to his regular duties, he's also been assigned Acting Regional Director for Northern Region, as well as has been selected to be on a jury for the last 2 or 3 weeks. And so he does send his regrets and ask that I represent him here. And so we
Don't
were.
pretend he doesn't regret being here.
What's that?
Don't pretend he regrets not being here.
I've also been involved with AMATS and transportation planning and acres for a number of years. I also sit on the AMATS Technical Advisory Committee, but in this capacity right now, I'm speaking from the department and not from AMATS. just in general, there's been some talk and a lot of reference to what has historically been called the Highway to Highway project. And as many people here know, that it was a very large and very impressive project that was being advanced and had a lot of support for. Once, under this administration, once it was learned what the overall cost and the potential impact would be, we were asked to kind of pull it back a little bit in terms of where it was in relation to other statewide priorities, and to look at if we could do more incremental improvements to the facility, still advancing the overall need to connect the Glen and Seward highways, but without engaging on something that was in probably the $700 million to $1 billion amount. And so that is what the department has done. And so as Mr. Lyon mentioned, there's right now we're purchasing right-of-way for expanding the Seward Highway between Dowling and Diamond, and we have just recently opened the section between Tudor and Diamond, the expansion of the Seward Highway. The reason that we're starting on the south end as a department is because the work that we had done as part of this Glen Highway to Seward Highway connection showed that all of our alternatives were basically the same. We would be staying basically in the same corridor from 20th Avenue south. And so we are starting on the 36th Avenue end. We do have a project that is state funded that is advancing. It is not fully funded for construction. And so our ability to advance that grade separation or interchange will be dependent on additional state funding. And there is, if anybody's interested, there is a public meeting on that on a week from this coming Monday. So but getting back to Gamble and Eager Street right now, it's right now there's over 50,000 cars a day that travel through that corridor between Eager and Gamble. And Mr. Foos has pointed out in the past that that traffic has remained fairly flat, and indeed it has. Over the last, about the extent of our technical analysis internally is really looking at some of the historic volumes out there. And it actually kind of peaks and dips with the economy. You can almost index it directly to the price of oil and how the state is doing. And so the concern that as a department we have is that it remains a very large and important national highway system route. And that it serves not just the Fairview neighborhood or even just Anchorage, but it has regional and statewide significance. The Glen and the Seward Highways being our two major facilities that connect Anchorage really to not just other areas of the state, but it's really important for goods movement and commerce. And so getting back to timelines, there's been some mention about the possibility of accelerating the environmental document again that would address this part of the Gamble Ingress Street under review right now. The earliest that we see that happening, frankly, is in about 2018. And once that gets started, assuming that there is that groundswell of support and moving through the environmental process, the very earliest that we could see construction would be about 2024. And this is just a snapshot at what could be possibly a best case scenario, but bottom line, we don't know. So when it comes to any of our major projects, right now, an alignment through Fairview was not selected. We did not get that far in advance, and it would be problematic, as been suggested, to maybe go ahead and advance purchase properties, because through our environmental document with the Federal Highway Administration, that would be a predetermination and basically putting the process upside down in its head. You need to keep all options on the table as you consider your routing. And so that is one of the challenges that we would have in advancing. Basically, as properties are improved and then their values go up, then of course what it does is it just makes the project cost more. It's not something we haven't dealt with before. It is the nature of the difficulty in the time frames that we worked with using the federal dollar. And so at this point we had intended, as Mr. Lyon had, or either that or the mayor that had mentioned, that this would become a local street, basically to serve residential and commercial needs at such time as there is another way to accommodate those 50,000 vehicles a day that travel through this area. And right now, we just don't have it. At this point, we're at about 85% capacity on Gamble Street, meaning that we have a little bit of flexibility, we have excess capacity. And yet, at such time as there are additional improvements, and one of them being, which is, I believe also on the agenda, is the Knickerham Crossing and its extension into Anchorage, initially being to the A and C Street, or to the C Street, and then the couplet, that spillover traffic would then come over to Ingrid Gamble. And so, again, until such time as we have another route for the traffic, it's going to be reliant on Ingrid and Gamble Street, and it's a challenge to reduce capacity on this facility, given its importance not just to Anchorage, but to the state. And that the department is looking, it feels that it really does need to be looked at in a much larger context in terms of how the proposal would impact travel, not just to people, but of goods and everything else throughout the region as well as the state.
Thank you, Ms. Wood. Any questions for Jennifer? When you're ready, I'll do mine, but.
It sounds to me as though we have a problem then in terms of that timing and any decision sooner with regard to this upgrade. We're going to start eliminating options at that point or increasing the cost for those options, I suspect. Any solution?
I don't have any to offer at this point, no. It's a difficult situation.
So, I'm not going to put words in Jennifer's mouth, but she can confirm or deny what I'm going to say. The highway got killed because the state didn't want to have an EIS that showed a route that they didn't have to pay for. Because if you do the work to get the route determined and then you don't do the route, you have to pay all the money back. And the administration said wasn't willing to commit the resources necessary to do this project. So Fairview remains in limbo while this goes forward. Want to deny anything yet?
I haven't heard it put that way. It was that it was viewed in terms of statewide priorities as not one of the highest ones, and so it was stopped. And yet I had thought about that, the concept of not having, it just wasn't a willingness to move forward at this point.
So as we have what Mr. Foos refers to as an inverse condemnation. Mr. Hall, do you want to talk about Arrow's experience?
Well, you know, it's putting a part of our community in this untenable situation. A good friend of mine had acquired property there, was going to put a parking lot on it, and then found out that 30 feet of it he couldn't do anything on because it may be highway to highway at some time in the future. I don't think he was playing any kind of games that if I improve this, I'll be able to sell it back to the state. It appears to me that in the timelines that we're looking at here, honestly, we tear high schools down every 35 years. And I'm not sure that we're even within that timeline when we would actually begin to see this building built. So most anything that would be developed in this, it appears to me, might be depreciated out by the time construction ever occurs.
Here's the final comment. You know, probably doing AMAT's too long. Jennifer's tired.
I'm there with you.
Yeah. That's why Pete's our new alternate on the AMAT's committee, so ultimately I can get off of that. But you know, when I was first on, we were talking about this project, highway to highway. And Gordon Keith said, you know, if I were an investor, I'd buy land in Fairview right now. Nobody has. Bill, do you have something you want to jump in?
Yeah, and it's just a little off topic, but I mean, hearing all the comments about the importance of this route for, you know, for commercial and everything, it has nothing to do with the redevelopment or anything like that, but it seems like on such an important route, a major improvement would be just being able to get lines painted on the road. Because right now, when you go down that road, it's a free-for-all. But you know, we're talking about it being an important route, and it's a very small thing. But if it is that important, with a little bit of money, we could improve it right now.
Good point, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for reminding all of us of why Highway to Highway was, got the kibosh, if you will, kibosh. But anyway, let's not forget that it was a major controversial project. We have 9 community councils, and we had one who usually got 10 people there. And when the Highway to Highway issue came up, there were 255. So I just wanted to mention, let's not forget how controversial that the project was within our community. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, that it was controversial?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah, when you proposed the route that went through College
Couple of
Village
routes.
and Project Park, yeah. that-
Yes,
that
and
went
unfortunately,
well.
Just a little reminder.
yes, and unfortunately, the project stopped before some of those more extreme options were eliminated. And so I thank you for the reminder of what's needed. And yet, from a planning standpoint, again, having been around a little bit too long, it was pretty phenomenal that back in 2005, when AMATS adopted its long-range plan, that it actually had strong community support for the first time to actually do some sort of highway-to-highway connection, and then seeing the benefits to the community to be able to reconnect neighborhoods. I mean, that was a pretty, that was a milestone, I think, in terms of community planning. And hopefully it will not be long before we can get going on it again.
We're already starting the next MTP. Anything else, Jennifer?
I have one thing, if you don't mind, that is that the EIS for Cabada says it's dependent upon highway-to-highway being built, and that's a fact.
The
So
phase
that's
2
just
is,
being
yes.
ignored. Now, the other thing is that when you look at Cabada, they're saying for the first 18,000 trips, 9,000 a day, is going to be on the C Street, A Street coupling. Now, that also has about 50,000 trips a day. So you can run that up to an additional 9,000 extra trips a day before you even approach what we'd have on Gamble Street if we did this redevelopment. They all connect to 3-lane highways. As you point out, without the lines in the winter, it's 3 lanes anyway, but you don't know where they are. We have answered every single question that has come in using the models of DOT, and yet we get questioned, well, maybe these models really don't work. Well, it's their models. I'm sorry, we go through this in AMATS. It's not their job. Who is it? That's who represents the municipality for transportation. You can't just say we don't know what's going to happen. We're using your models, so we're not sure if they're right. Well, what are we supposed to do? This is not acceptable. But if you want to, because of nervousness about highway to highway, and we think it's pretty sure going to go between Hyder and Ingra, then remove it from the tax exemption zone, although you are doing a taking of those people's value. You are doing an inverse condemnation. But if you want to do that, put the rest of it through. If you're worried about H2H, leave Hyder to Ingra out of it. And we'd like to do some planning on it. We've offered to DOT, we'll work with it. We're not unreasonable, we're looking for solutions here. Cabada, DOT, we've offered to all of them. And I think we should sit down and do some planning. Things are a little clearer now. Cabada's a little bit clearer. The 36th Avenue, it is partly funded. It's got $50 million. But it's a $110 million project. $60 million short even on 36th turnaround. That's before you even start to get to Northern Lights, Benson, and Fireweed. So, I mean, this is a long way out, what you say. I mean, we can't say we're waiting until, our kids are all through college even to start making a decision.
Thank you, Mr. President. Jennifer, can I give you an assignment?
Are you giving it to Rob?
Sure.
She'll pass it on.
In my old transportation days, we used to actually do pre-project acquisitions, and I realized that if you use the federal EIS project process, you get in trouble. But could you explore whether there's a potential to use state GF dollars in this area and get back to us on whether that, if we did that, it would somehow damage the EIS process going forward?
I have a suspicion on the answer, and yet I will make sure that it's done right before I
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say thank you for your comments, but my comment reminding folks about the controversial issue when Highway to Highway was before our community council was by no means my personal opinion as to whether or not this highway should go through. I am hopeful that when it does get on the surface again, that the community will be ready. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Okay, thank you.
Briefly, just speak to that. The community council, as it stands, is prepared to see the highway come through the neighborhood as long as the powers that be work really hard to connect with the neighborhood and make sure that it doesn't cause more devastation. So we're ready to help figure out a solution. I want to make sure that you understand that.
Fairview's done a nice job.
If I can follow up, I do understand that. Thank you, absolutely.
We're ready.
So I think Judy's on the hot seat now. We'll let Jennifer go this time.
I'll just sit here, if that's all right with you. See everyone, it's fine. I'm Judy Doherty. I'm the acting executive director with Kinnickinnick Bridge and Toll Authority. We've had meetings with Mr. Booth, and I just like to make it clear that Cabada is the toll authority, the Kinnickinnick Crossing is the project, and Cabada as a toll authority is not a planning organization outside the bounds of the project. We understand that there's coordination to be done with, in the future when these projects need to be coordinated. But I thought I'd just back up a little bit and give you a little overview. You're probably well aware that legislation passed this year, it's getting the governor's signature, that actually gives the design and construction of the project back to DOT. And Cabada will continue to exist as a toll operator, a toll collections agency. So we're working with DOT to make that happen, and DOT will be the borrower of the TIFIA loan, which is the one outstanding element of the project funding that is yet to be secured. DOT being the borrower of that TIFIA loan significantly increases the likelihood that that loan will be secured. So as an agency that has been tasked with getting this project built, we are thrilled that we've got that very, very high likelihood that the project will be funded, and we'll know about that funding within the next, say, 6 months or so, and the project will be moving forward. So all along, there's been this uncertainty of when will the Kinnickinnick Crossing be constructed, at what point in time will traffic, start being routed differently through this community. And now we know. We have a high degree of certainty. The project will be under construction, very, very likely. You'll see active construction in 2016. So that's really right around the corner. Our project traffic projections show that by the time the project is open for 10 to 12 years, there will be a need, there'll be that impact on A and C to the point where there's a need for a second connection to Inger-Gamble. And so that project will probably get started and ready for construction around, 2030. And again, like Jennifer said, these are the traffic modeling is sort of a voodoo type of science. You never really know until you get there, but you can plan the best that you can plan, and that's what we've been doing. So I guess what strikes me here is I'm hearing Ms. Jackson. There are a lot of other community councils who are very concerned about traffic flow through this community. And as I see the proposal for an Inger-Gamble connection or Inger-Gamble, or is it just Gamble? I'm not even that familiar, to be reduced in lanes, you've got the folks over in South Addition that are going, well, wait a minute, all this traffic needs to be shared. And so just because maybe South Addition hasn't hired engineers to do some studies about why A and C maybe should be narrowed and the traffic go over to Inger-Gamble, I think that you need to look at this sort of more comprehensive balance of things.
Mr. Jackson has a
Thank
question
you,
about
Mr.
that.
Chairman. I really think that several of you really misunderstood my comments, and I'm sorry about that, because I didn't mean it the way that the response that's coming forward thinks that I meant it. I just made a comment, that's it. Yeah, and I know that my 9 community councils weren't the only ones involved, I realize
No,
that, and I'm happy to hear that the community councils affected are on board, because I certainly am.
Right, and I simply agree with
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, now that the project will be a DOT project, that coordination, I guess, with subsequent phases of this highway to highway, or what it, how it evolves, that coordination will be a seamless thing. As Mr. Cluse pointed out, our future phase, our environmental document shows just sort of a general tying into Ingram and Gamble, kind of between 3rd and 4th Avenue, right over that Snow White Cleaners, but by the time we get there, the whole environmental process is going to have to be revisited. We'll have to have a reevaluation, and that'll all be coordinated. I'm here to answer any questions anyone might have, and I also have business card if anybody wants to reach out to us.
Any questions from the board?
I'll keep my editorial to myself. Assembly get up next.
All right. So I've spent quite a bit of time looking at the proposal and learning about transportation and hearing from many of the folks that we talked to today. And so there's always pros and cons to such a significant policy decision, which is what you are all faced with. And there are certainly a lot of benefits, short-term basis to the Fairview district. But what I want to present to you is just some other comments for consideration for you to think about as you go forward. First of all, there were 3 of us in the administration that went through the ordinance, and it's very complicated, it's very broad, and it is very precedent-setting. First of all, our observation is that the ordinance does remove the current test that the CFO and her team evaluate in regard to determining is a tax abatement needed for the financial viability of the project. So that particular component, based on our read, completely goes away. And so what that means in the future is, based on the way it's read today, something like a Safeway could do an expansion, and they would just essentially submit their invoices to the CFO after they've shown, that this is a neighborhood project, and then we would essentially abate their taxes associated with that. So the question would be, is that good financial policy to provide a tax abatement for an organization that likely doesn't need it in order for it to be financially viable? Additionally, we have been approached over the last, Mayor and I, over the last 3 to 4 weeks by several other developers who are looking for tax abatements as well. I think word is getting out that this proposal is here. Several of them are right here in downtown Anchorage, and I think that we need to really think long and hard about what we are doing to our tax base. And is this really the direction that we want to go? And one of them is very close to where we are currently sitting right now. The building is over 15 years old, according to the code right now. And then with this new information, there really isn't a strong financial review that would need to be done. So we need to think about long and hard, is that really what we want to do going forward? The second bullet is just, I think as a group, we really need to question the policy of using public funds on a short-term basis that results in an increase in cost to other public projects, the state projects, the Cavada project, and the highway to highway. Even though they are quite far out in the future, to me, those are still tax dollars, whether they're property tax dollars or they're oil dollars, which is essentially what those state dollars are. Do we really want to increase the value of these buildings to potentially be purchased in the future? It's just something that's very important to consider. Also, I had talked earlier with Patrick mostly about PRPs, and did we really want to provide tax abatement for companies like Shell when they've already been identified as a primary responsible party in regard to environmental cleanup. And really, you know, tax abatements, everybody needs to understand, this is just a shifting of the tax burden. We're just shifting it. In that case, we would be shifting it away and giving Shell a benefit, and everybody else in the city picks it up. Also, the housing analysis report that was referred to earlier by Mary Jane has a component in there that addresses really what is the fiscal gap right now in regard to construction for the multi-residential houses. That is what we really need so badly in our community. And that report indicated that that fiscal gap in regard to construction relative to a return on investment for developers is in the 20 to 55% level. That's pretty high, and that is an indication of a problem here. I mean, undoubtedly we have a problem as a community that we need to face. But a tax abatement on a standalone basis is not gonna close that gap. And you know, the mayor's had several meetings with others in the community about, you know, how to solve the housing crisis. And there's a recognition that there needs to be many different solutions that are coming together to close this gap. And it isn't something, I don't think, that we should just shift around amongst our 100,000 property taxpayers in our city. Also, what I did was provided copies for you of this report. This is called Rethinking Property Tax Incentives for Businesses. And I think it's really important when setting a policy of this magnitude that you look at what has happened throughout the United States in regard to the effectiveness of tax incentives. And what this report does is it looks at all 50 states. It identifies the type of abatements and the type of incentives that have been in place over many years, and they do a complete independent and objective analysis of those in determining were they really effective, and from a community perspective, have tax incentives achieve their goals. And you can read in the first 3 pages of the report in regard to the executive summary is that from business side of the perspective, they concluded that the tax incentives are unlikely to have a significant impact on the profitability of a business. So I think it's important that you consider that. I mean, we have the fabulous example of what happened in Tacoma, and you know, there are definitely successes throughout our country in regard to the effectiveness of tax incentives. But as a whole, what this report concludes is that they generally are not. And I am just presenting this to you so that you can see this from a big picture perspective. One of the one of the incentive tools that's noted in the report is a TIF. Paul referred to a TIF. There's been a lot of discussion in our community about TIF. TIF stands for tax increment financing. We do have a limitation currently with our state constitution in our ability to implement a TIF. But that's something that I think we should focus on in terms as a community is to try to get that fixed. The report indicates that TIFs really have been the most effective tool in regard to incentivizing the communities for revitalization. So there's national evidence in regard to that. And then I just also wanted to bring up that there are other tools in our finance toolbox from the city's perspective in regard to what we can help developers with. And one is just our special assessment districts that are established for utility infrastructure improvements. We are currently managing 95 of those throughout our city. We have a special system where we do that. Essentially what we do is we fund these infrastructure upgrades essentially out of the cash pool. And we do the upgrade, and then the costs are distributed to the owners of homes in those districts, and we amortize over a certain life depending on the dollar amount. And you probably all remember, because we just recently changed the code in regard to the amortization level depending on the cost to try to help minimize that for homeowners.
And I should know this answer, but I don't. The special assessment districts, do we have to use municipal, like AWW, do they need to do the construction, or can it be contracted out?
I think historically we've done the construction, but, we we manage it and we contract
Right,
a
but
lot of
it
it
so it
out.
has to be managed by a municipality. for
Yes,
this.
I believe that's true. Is that
Yes.
correct, George?
They have to inspect everything that goes along, so they're in effect managing it. Not project managing it per se, but when a contractor is hired, he has to do it to their specifications, and they're inspecting it.
So you could do, could there be a possibility of a public-private partnership?
Well, let's look at out there on the development for the outlet mall. J&L is actually putting in the trunk line, the sewer, and for
Right.
that area. So that's a partnership between the utility and J&L. Again,
And
it's
they're building
still...
that part of 100th Avenue too.
Right, so
Right.
that's
That
what
also.
is bringing this to mind, why I'm asking.
Right, but-
you can do that also with the utilities.
Yes, they can, but remember, the utility has to say to make sure it's being done according to the standard.
Right, which, that makes sense, but so that you can do it with the private sector and then basically have it approved by the utility.
Yes.
And still have it be a special assessment district.
Also, another tool in our toolbox is a special assessment bond itself. And the last time that I'm aware that we did this was in 1989. We in fact issued a bond for $3.4 million for specific utility upgrades, and then the folks in those neighborhoods, it's straight debt. They would pay back that debt associated with the infrastructure upgrade. So it's
I
just.
want to have the same answer to that. If it was bonded, could it be done in this public-private partnership?
I believe so. We have those partnerships all along. We've got that one that's going on down there in Birdwood.
Yeah.
On the road development. And so there is provisions for, you call it a private-public arrangement, but basically what it is, it's called improvements to public infrastructure.
I just wondered if there's any problem with the bond, being a municipal bond, if there would have to be a project managed and contracted out by the municipality.
It does have to be managed, but not necessarily does the city have to do the work, no.
The benefit of that is you can get tax exempt status.
Right.
So you can get a lower cost of money as compared to a contractor or a developer doing it, because their cost of money is going to be higher than ours. So there are definitely advantages to that. So also, moving on to the next slide, the way the proposal is written right now is it is going to be an implementation challenge for us. No doubt we will rise to the occasion. We always do. But it will be, I think there could be situations where when we're reviewing, for example, costs associated with environmental cleanup project, where we're faced with, was this really a reasonable cost? Did the developer, and I'm not indicating any developer would do this, but did the developer hire his brother? The costs are higher than they should have been, and as a result of a higher cost structure as compared to what would be reasonable, the developer would get a tax rebate for that. We would have to develop internally a lot of controls around that and establish a lot of administrative procedures associated with really making sure that we are monitoring and we have the public trust at hand. We don't have a system right now to track this kind of stuff. We can certainly do it, but it will be manual outside of our current CAMA system, because we don't have anything set up where we can be tracking this type of cost. Additionally, I had indicated there were 3 of us that read the ordinance. All 3 of us walked away with completely different interpretations of what the ordinance said. So in order for us to develop the administrative procedures assuming if you all go forward with this, we would really like to have an opportunity to really clarify it so that we could develop the administrative procedures internally so that we understand really what the intent is. Next, what I'd like to do is just share with you financial implications of this. You know, it's really, we really want the community improved, and I don't want anyone to ever misunderstand that. And for a builder to go in and improve the area and to increase additional value, which means additional property taxes, is really great for our community, no doubt. But what we have to think about is just the impact to the tax cap, because the way that this would work is if we have new construction that is exempt from property tax, if you remember the property tax calculation, and we showed it to you on the next page so that you can look at it, and we can look at it from a numeric perspective. The new construction, the way the definitions are currently written, would not land in the calculation of new construction, and as a result, it would not increase our property tax cap. And this is assuming that we are taxing to the max in terms of the tax cap. And so from this example, in terms of what you can see here, what I presented was our step 4 in terms of the way we go through and determine our tax cap calculation. This year, we added $2.2 million in property taxes associated with new construction. So, and that number is about $100 million of new construction. So what I tried to show on the second column is if that was $50 million, because $50 million of it was exempt and abated as a result of this program, what that would do is the new construction taxes would be down about $1 million. And what that would do is it would lower your tax cap by $1 million. And we really just sat down and started thinking this through this week. And so I'm not intending to surprise anyone or anything like that. It was just.
To clarify, Lucinda, what you're saying is it would reduce the increase in the tax cap by.
Yes, right. And what that would be is, I mean, those dollars are lost forever. But, you know, trying to think of some solutions to this, you know, what we were thinking is what we could do is we could go in and we could look at what is the definition of new construction, so that, let's say a project is abated, where they have tax abatement for 10 years, is that we could change the code and say that when the tax abatement expires, then at that point in time, we would be able to add that back in so that you don't have this negative impact. So we're trying to think of solutions to help with this. And I talked with Dennis about this morning, and he's going to look at the code to see what we can do to prevent this from happening. I mean, this is really important, particularly like for next year, you know, and you know, I know we're talking 10 years out, but right now, I mean, we're looking at only a $5 million increase to our tax cap. And so every million counts when you're looking at just $5 million if you tax to the cap. So this is a really important consideration for us. The way it is written right now, if the exempt construction is not in there, you know it's the same situation with exemptions. All it does is shift the burden to others. There isn't any new revenue. It's just a shifting of the revenue. So it's really important to think that through, unless we make the change to the code. With all of that said, and you know, trying to look at both sides of this, I mean, I really view that that's my job, is to present both sides of this. If you go to page 16, what you can see here would be an alternative solution to what is currently presented. And the first bullet would be considering all of the potential highways and the Kabat and the Kennegarn Bridge coming in. We would have you consider looking at a smaller deteriorated area And that is identified here on the map that has the blue boundaries. And in a minute here, Jerry can go through and describe how we got to that. The other thing is what I would recommend in regard to the changing of the code, in regard to eliminating the financial need test, I would suggest that you not do that for commercial projects, and that you keep the financial need test in place. And the reason for that would be because small to medium-sized businesses still can come in and apply for tax abatement. They would likely achieve it, they would likely be able to attain it because they're a small to medium-sized business, and the likelihood of the property tax causing the property tax abatement causing their cash flow to be positive really is important to them. But for larger multinational businesses, Office Max, Safeway, I think that this would be unnecessary. They typically are not making decisions about improvements based on property taxes. They are making them based on other reasons that drive their profitability. However, on the next bullet, we really would suggest that there be changes to the municipal code to address the housing situation, particularly, as it was presented earlier, we really, as a city, have a challenge here. And so what we would suggest is that there be incentives in the code to incentivize housing developments. And in those situations, we would eliminate that financial need test and indicate that there should be other tests that should be met that address some of the housing requirements of our community. We would not support the tax abatements to be associated with the actual construction costs associated with environmental remediation and all of those qualified expenses that we had talked about earlier, just due to the whole implementation challenge associated with that. But what we would support would be similar to what we have currently, which is whatever the incremental tax is associated with the improvement, that we would abate that, and that would provide a current incentive for that whole housing initiative. And that would be a really clean way to go about achieving the goal. It would be very aligned, with our current processes. It would get us out of the business of evaluating individual invoices, potentially getting into a lot of conflict with developers about, is this really reasonable, protecting the public interest. I think that is not something we want to go down. I mean, if you go down that path, you could see it. We disagree, well, guess what? Then they're going to be in front of you. And is that something that you really want to be involved in? Also, in regard to another alternative, in addition to incentivizing the housing component, the mixed-use component also we think should be a part of this. In terms of reading the housing report, it is clear in there that successful new revitalization zones require the mixed use in order for the walkability, in order to have neighborhoods. And so we would support that as well. But we would want to have some sort of controls, I think, in place there in terms of what is an appropriate percentage of that particular development in order for it to be eligible. And I put in here 70%. I don't know what the right percent is. I think Tacoma used 50%, but that's something that we could further explore. So in light of all of these comments, we asked Dennis to do a complete rewrite of the AO as it is today, and he has done that. And the section 1235.05 has been completely rewritten to incorporate some of these changes that, actually for all of these changes that we've identified here. I've not distributed.
A lot of paper. We were looking at it, didn't see it anywhere.
It's right here. And what he did was he looked at what was done in Tacoma, And then he looked at the state statutes to try to implement something that's associated with housing within all of our confines. It's very simple. It's really easy to implement. And I think it really addresses the goals of the Fairview community. But more importantly, I think it addresses the goals of our community. And it is something then that could be implemented throughout the city to address the housing initiative and not just Fairview.
Well, this is coming in front of us on Tuesday, so when are we getting a copy of that version?
It's my understanding you're not voting on it till the 24th, though.
Well,
Right, and we just got this.
We'd like to.
Right.
Right.
I just read timelines.
We may need to hold off for a couple of weeks so that we can absorb what you're putting in front of us, but we haven't.
So I'm just saying
yeah.
time-wise.
Yeah.
Right, and Dennis just finished this last night, okay, so it's fresh off the press. And so we will get it to you. Yeah, we will get it to you, and you can review it and evaluate it, and we can work together, I think, on making updates to this to try to get it so that it meets everyone's needs.
I saw, you kind of answered it first. I was hoping we could continue hearing.
That's sort of my inclination, because I knew there would be some language questions that needed to be
Right.
addressed, and we hadn't gotten anything
And
yet. So.
does this one qualify as an S version?
It doesn't sound like it.
No, but I just wanted, you know,
No,
that's,
because it is completely different.
so that,
It's completely
and
different.
would we consider having another work session comparing the two? I mean, I think it would be nice to sort of, because this is a lot of material, and where I usually defer to the assembly person or person's district, I do see this as a precedent-setting, it could be precedent-setting legislation, so I'd like to see us get it correct, particularly, you know, in light of the housing issue and stuff, so.
I know there's interest in seeing if this concept works, and if it does, taking it to Spinard, taking it to Muldoon.
So, I mean.
So we do want to get it right.
And just a request if we could do another.
Listen, we're probably too late for the addendum, but if you can get that introduced on Tuesday as a new version, so that we can work with the two versions, and if we want to vote in 2 weeks, we have it in front of us.
Would you like us to
We can lay it on the table.
We can lay it on-
I mean,
I hate laying on the table, but if that's the way it has to be, it has to be. But,
They closed out for the addendum.
yeah, okay. So let's get it prepared.
okay, we can lay it on the table.
We'll make sure there's copies for the public so that, you know, obviously just for introduction, take people time to absorb it. Paul and the group.
And I would like to
kick the tires
request or
and-
consider this another work
I
session.
think it actually kind of melts a good idea.
Okay.
Okay.
Wrap up?
And,
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Yeah.
before we continue, I just talked to the deputy clerk, and we could possibly be on the addendum, because if the addendum is not going to be ready until Monday, she thinks, and it would be better if it's on the addendum, according to the clerk, so you might want to have a conversation
And
with
we'd have
the
it to
clerk's
review.
office.
That'd make me
Mr.
happier.
Chairman.
okay, we have this, but we have to prepare all of the headers and.
And it's gotta go, yeah.
Can you do that? Like,
Well, I mean,
2 hours?
We will make our best
Yeah.
effort to have it.
We could do it, I think we could do it.
We'll make our best effort to have it
By
ready
Monday.
Monday.
You wouldn't have to be an attorney, would you, sir? Please continue.
Okay, so in closing, where's Jerry?
You want to bring Jerry
Yeah,
up for his
in
final?
closing, this is the, you know, in regard to just the deteriorated zone for Fairview, this is the area that he will address.
Mr. Weaver, welcome back.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The graphics that you have before you really show that the areas are really not too dissimilar in development with respect to age of structures and the demographic profiles of people living there. And really the point is that we have a similar situation of Fairview, the Gamble corridor, in other parts of the community as well, with respect to Muldoon, Mountain View, Spinard. There are different scenarios and situations, but they have similar kinds of issues with respect to major transportation systems. And in my evaluation of tax abatement districts and looking at the TIFs is that once you do put them in place and they're very well constructed, they work, because then there will be an incentive. There's this return on investment that's a little bit better than the norm, but we need to know the public benefit from that action. This refined boundary is still about $1 billion worth of property in area, but it's probably something that we could work with respect to perhaps in addition to the revised ordinance, look at perhaps accelerating the undergrounding of the electrical in there. I think that's a doable situation, so that's basically why we came up with the revised boundaries, to make it a smaller area, to make it as a trial basis, to see what the results are going to be.
Anything from Mr. Weaver? Everyone's got a copy of their map.
Well, and as you can see, Mr. Chair, it keeps in mind the corridor, the potential H2H corridor, which, as Paul mentioned, I mean, if that's something that we think is going to be a given, we don't want to come into conflict if we can avoid it. So I think Mr. Weaver's come up with a pretty good new boundary criteria that, like you said, we can get some positive things done in that main corridor that is our main focus, and that's going to be a positive. So appreciate that.
Anything else before we wrap up?
I'll respond to the mayor just real quickly, and I agree with that. And regardless of what you do with H2H or any of this, there's no reason for the uncertainties to that to say we shouldn't develop the properties around it. So this is another discussion down the road. There's a lot of things that are going on with that through AMATs. But I don't really think this is complex. It's pretty simple. If we declare this area, and people are going to still have to come with those elements of the CFO, and they're going to verify it and say, yes, this is municipal infrastructure. We're not afraid if it's a big company. So when we were in Dutch Harbor, multi-million, billion Japanese companies, and it said, we'll pay for this, and we'll do it. Well, hallelujah, that was great. That wasn't their property. What they're buying is municipal infrastructure. This is the city's water pipeline. This is the city's drainage system. This isn't theirs. This isn't their building. We're talking about the infrastructure. So I come in and I want to build a building, and all I need is a 12-inch line. Oh no, you got to put a 36-inch line. Someone might want to build on there. Now you got to pay for all of that, but you don't get the benefit of it. Somebody else does. So that's why, fine, we'll finance it. Give us an abatement for that. It's municipal infrastructure. It's no different than this building. They came in and built. They said you got to build the floor of this building in order to do your project. The same thing. It's municipal property. Let's remember what we're buying with the tax abatement. So we still think commercial should be involved in this and take a look at it. And I think there's also the downtown partnership might have something to say. I think it is justified to look at a little bit of the property that they're talking about too, down to Denali Street in their area. It meets that criteria. So
we'll continue that conversation. Mr. Hall, you had something?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I spent 45 years in the cabinet business, and during that time I had people come to me with some drawings that were just absolutely incredible. And the analogy that I always used with them was anybody can draw a flying horse, but building it and make it fly, it's difficult. And I think that's kind of the scenario that we're in here now. I think this is a really important piece of municipal code that we're dealing with here. And, you know, I think we need to delay this a couple of weeks or even more to get it done, Paul.
I agree 100%.
I know you're
Let's get it right.
But I'd like to get it right because, you know, I don't know that a tax abatement isn't a good way to pay for infrastructure that the entire community owns. They're going to pay for it one way or another. Sooner or later, it's got to be done. So how we do it is beyond me. And you know, I'll just close by saying when I was on the State Board of Education, we were dealing with free care for kids prior to going into school. And we'd sit down and write the regulation. And the pathetic part about it was we ended up writing regulation for the worst performer. And even then, we found when we wrote that regulation, they really didn't care anyway. I mean, they weren't going to conform to the rules to start with. So I want to be very cautious in what we're doing, but I hope that we don't end up doing something that would penalize really good projects from being able to advance and happen because we try to write it ironclad and just make it impossible to do an end run. So I really want to be a part of this. I've got areas in my district that desperately need this help. So with that, I'll close.
Trying to kill the handyman ordinance. Anybody else? All right, Mr. Constant, you want to have a brief?
I just want to put a human face on this question briefly. So we talked about three things really, but one is the core element. We talked about the inebriates briefly, and we talked about the Gamble Street project, and we talked about the tax abatement. And historically, the inebriate problem, the solution has been, well, let's put everything over there because that's a solution that works. It's economical, it works. So a citywide problem has been localized into a community devastation, and that needs a citywide solution. And this neighborhood has come up with a solution, and we're fighting to make it happen. So that's big picture problems, small neighborhoods having to figure out solutions. So you have the Gamble Street project, and people talk about the statewide needs are so important because we need to make sure the traffic flows. And so we've shown and we've proven and we've got the documentation that says it will flow, even in the configuration we propose. So this big, huge problem that's carved our neighborhood that continues to cause devastation, and you can see people in wheelchairs driving down Gamble Street because they can't get on the sidewalk that they're going to put corner cuts on for ADA accessibility. Citywide problem, local small person solution. We're coming up with it, and we're here to ask for your help. This tax abatement issue, we hear now that the whole city is going to have to pay for this problem. Well, guess what? Our neighborhood, this little Fairview over here, this east downtown, is paying a tax, a huge tax, a tax that no other part of this town has to pay. And that tax comes on our backs in the form of the people marching through the streets drunk, and roads that aren't getting repaired until 2035 because everyone else needs a solution. You know, and we can't abate the taxes in this neighborhood because it might cost people in South Anchorage who already have developers coming to them and saying, let's pay for the road projects because we think we can make this work. Or in our neighborhood, there's no reason for them to develop because everything is flown away. Anything worth of value is leaving because there's no investment incentive. And so you got a scrappy group of neighborhoods praying to you to fix this problem. And we even came up with a third solution, right? We need you. We need you. So that's from the neighborhood, from a resident, from a volunteer, all of this. So please take it in consideration. We're real people. We have real needs.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Anything else before we wrap up?
I just want to make a comment, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
By all means.
I just want to thank all the presenters for this very worthwhile and informational work session. It was really great, and the project is really great, and I appreciate hearing from Ms. Mahoney and her take on the ordinance, and I'm really, really hopeful that we can work this out. I truly am, and my heart goes out to everybody in this community, including Fairview. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Steele.
Yeah, one last comment.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see a real need in this particular area. I can see a real need. I can see Spenard Road, we've been working on for a decade or two. I can see a real benefit for certain parts of Arctic, where we've got transmission lines down both sides of it from Chugach and MLNP, and mobile home parks and all kinds of things. I think the community needs something, and we do need to get it right. And I'm all for working on it, whatever we got to do.
Is there anything to wrap up?
No, thank you.
All right, appreciate everyone's participation today. We'll be back in 10 minutes tomorrow. Good exercise.